I see a lot of returning attendees from past webinars, so we want to thank you for your continued support. If this is your first webinar, this is an ongoing educational series that we've been doing throughout 2017, and we'll continue to do so in 2018. I am Steve Burns with Crawford Software, and today I'm joined by our founder and president, Steve Carr.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Steve's going to show us some of the new features and benefits of the Enhanced Quality Assurance module within Epicor 10. We do have some folks logging in, so I thought what we would do is open up today's webinar with a short poll question. And the reason that we ask is that we do like to understand what customers are using kind of the standard quality modules versus those that have moved on to kind of the enhanced quality within Epicor. And I'll just put that up for a minute or so and give you the ability to answer that question. And just as a little housekeeping, folks, if you would like to ask Steve a question, he will be fielding questions at the end of today's webinar. There's a couple ways that you can do that. There's a question box at the bottom of your bar. There's also a chat box. So either way, if you would like to ask a question of Steve, please feel free to do so during the webinar, and Steve will answer those at the end. So we'll give it just a couple more moments. It looks like most people have responded, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close that now. And let's look at those results. So 67% yes, 33% no. Steve would say that's about what we see with our customers out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say so. It looks pretty standard from what we see. All right, I'll go ahead and close that poll. Just before we begin, maybe just a little bit of background on Crawford Software. We've been an Epicor partner for 10 years and have worked with companies of all sizes to implement, to upgrade, to train the best ways to use Epicor. Our certifications go all the way back to Vista and Vantage, up through Epicor 9 and through ERP 10. So one of the things we always point out is we're proud of it. Since the last 17 years almost now, 90% of our customers have hired us for a second engagement. So that's something we're very proud of. So again, I appreciate everybody's time. On that note, what I will do is go ahead and make Steve the presenter, and we can walk through Steve's presentation today. Steve, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Mr. Burns. And let's just see if I can clean up my desktop. So let me just know if everyone can see my screen.
I can see it, Steve.
All right. Just trying to get the GoToWebinar thing to move off the screen just a little bit, just in case. Excuse me. All right. Well, again, thank you, everyone, for taking the time today. Want to just spend a little bit of time setting up for what we're going to cover today. So just so we're all on the same page, the agenda today is to do a little bit of a session review, then a high-level process flow review, and then we'll talk about the details and the mechanics of the Enhanced Quality Management module. I did want to take a second and circle back to that, so I apologize. I think the original outline had labeled this as Advanced Quality. It's really the Enhanced Quality module that we're going to be covering today. The Advanced Quality module is actually a third-party software package integrated with Epicor's ERP. We really wanted to focus on just the next level. So if you're using quality management in Epicor currently and go to Enhanced Quality, you're going to get a few more features, a lot more robustness out of the process without buying a whole third-party module. We'll probably find some time to do the AQM, which is from IQS, acronym heaven, at another time and go through that in more detail. But right now, just so we're all on the same page, this really is talking about enhanced quality management. After we cover the process flow review, we'll talk about, like I said, some of the mechanics, the inspection attributes, the specification that gets built from that process, which is a collection of those attributes, then attaching that specification to an inspection plan, and then we'll talk about designing the configurator. And that's the product configurator is actually the mechanical tool in the background that's letting you, excuse me, set up the screens, the layout, the look, and the answers that are coming in, the prompts and the answers that are coming in for the inspection process. Then how we attach that to a part master, how we attach that to a purchase order, high-level overview of what happens during that process of incoming inspection, and then touch on the difference that can be done with some RMA processing ideas. All right. So with that overview, moving to the next slide. So today is, I won't say death by PowerPoint, but it is a lot of PowerPoint. Really want to review more in this way than going through the system and walking through it, because to really do it justice and really show you something that would be beneficial to your company, your organization, we're very happy to do that. We're very happy to do a one-on-one demonstration for people and walk them through, but we would do a little bit more of a preparation work ahead of time for that. Understand your business, understand your requirements, and build a demonstration that has prompts and features that are relevant to what you're trying to do and what you're trying to capture with the enhanced quality module. So again, today is more PowerPoint. I do have Epicor open. If we have time and we can go back and forth, I'll try to do that, but really sticking to the presentation view from this point. We're going to be reviewing the simple rules and the validation process. So this is not getting into complicated, as I talk about the second bullet, items that could be used with BPMs or detailed programming to make lists of values dynamic, to make them predicated on how you answered other prompts. This is really just saying the simple basics. This is almost like a entry-level training course that for a beginner should give you enough information. If you have the the enhanced quality module enabled in your system, you should be able to use this to build a working model within your system to start testing and validating against. All right. As Steve had talked about, please use the chat window to go ahead and ask those questions. I hopefully will be not talking so long that we don't have time at the end to be able to come back and answer some questions from people and go through some of those review items. And today, just a reminder, today is a presentation, not a demo. I do have Epicor open. If you really want to see more of it, I would highly encourage reaching out to Steve Burns. We'll go ahead and set up a demo. We will create data that's relevant to your environment so it really has some resonance with how you want to use the system. And we can even build some of those more dynamic ones that I talked about, where if you pick the Ford pickup truck versus the Chevy pickup truck, the prompts that come out to you are going to be different per that answer that you gave us in the first one. And again, we're talking more about how the product configurator works, but you can do it for the incoming inspection process too. All right. So at a high level, Epicor Enhanced Quality Management, it allows you to create a user-defined inspection plan, multiple plans, multiple versions, multiple specifications, and we'll talk about this more as we go through the detailed screens and the detailed presentation, but then you can utilize those during the incoming inspection process, during the inspection process associated with an RMA, during the job processing, during different places, and tailor those to what you need and the data elements that you want to capture. It uses the product configurator to design a screen and how that's presented to the user and what they see. And we'll go through those more or less step by step as we build up on this. The key thing to remember now is the data that is entered is validated against. It's used to determine, are we going to accept or are we going to reject the lot that came in the back door? So it's no longer just the user saying, I reject it or I accept it. It's actually used intuitive data to bring it through to that level. So at a high level, the process, and this is not a process flow for inspection, processing, obviously, this is a process flow related to how do you build up an inspection plan and use the enhanced quality module. So you start by creating the inspection attributes. What are the things that you want to capture during the process? For a bar stock, you may want to capture the diameter. You may want to know if it's been powder coated. You may want to allow the entry of a comment field. You may want to know if it has a serial number, and if it has a serial number attached to the bar, enter and capture that serial number. Once you build that list of prompts, questions, or in this case, we call them attributes in the system, you build and approve a specification. And you can have multiple specifications, and they can have multiple revisions of those specifications. And you'll see a little bit more of how that works once I get into more details of the presentation. Once you've built that specification, then you're going to create an inspection plan. And that inspection plan is going to have more details and more questions, and it's also going to be attached to a part revision. Okay? Once we do that, we'll configure the inspection plan, we'll run through the test input process, and then once you approve the plan, that's what gets assigned automatically to the purchase order when it's created for that part. So moving on to the next one. So inspection attributes. Inspection attributes are used to define the data elements, as I talked about earlier, that need to be entered, captured, validated. Basically, what do you need the user to give you as far as information to make that determination? Am I accepting that lot? Is it good? Or am I rejecting that lot? And this doesn't tie into the next level of that determination, the inspection process, once you accept or reject. If you reject, if you're using quality management already in Epicor, you know you've got another set of choices that come into play. Do you want to assign it to a job and possibly rework it internal? Do you want to return it to the vendor for credit? Do you want to return it to the vendor for rework and replacement? This is really just about those inspection prompts that are coming in. The attributes that are available, you can create attributes to capture numeric values. Kind of redundant there, I said only numbers are allowed, but numbers. Do you want the diameter? Inside diameter, outside diameter, different things like that that may come into it. The thickness of sheet metal is a good example that comes into play there. Checkboxes, just simple checkboxes. They're on or they're off. And are you asking the user to just say, is it powder coated? Yes or no. You can have a checkbox to do that, or you can do it in other ways too. A combo box is something that presents the user with a list of values, and they pick from that drop-down list of value sets that you want. This is the only thing I'll accept. And I'll talk more about that when I get into a combo box example, how you've got both sides. You've got the list of values that you present, and then what you consider a passing value. You've got characters. That's just alphanumerics. I mean, comments, as I see, a little bit lower there. So a serial number would be a good example for a character field where they can just freeform enter in how they want it. You've got date fields, and we've got that date capability, and we can set what's the lowest date or the beginning date that I would accept up until a certain date out in the future. And then comment fields. Those are just great big blocks of text that they can freeform enter values into. Not sure my calculations down below. I wouldn't worry about reading that verbatim, but the end result is there are a lot of fields and a lot of attributes that you can define and then build your inspection plans, your specification and inspection plans from those. What you're seeing here is the attribute maintenance screen. And in the attribute maintenance screen, you're putting in, and these PowerPoint that I put in here is really meant to be almost like a training manual. You'll see I've called out all the fields that are on the screen and tried to tell you what the value sets are and any tips as far as using them. So the attribute you create, in this case, we created one for the diameter. It has to be a unique value. The description, it's whatever you want, as we've talked about before. That attribute type, which is this field that we're seeing right here, which is currently set to numeric, that's what we were talking about earlier. You choose, is it a number, is it a checkbox, is it a drop box, is it a comment field, is it a date field? And then here, you're going to go ahead and assign where within the table is this assigned. So all of these attributes are stored in the database and are reportable. They can be used. So as we're building these inspection plans, remember, we're taking in quantifiable data during the incoming inspection process, whether it's tied to a purchase order incoming receipt or it's tied to an RMA incoming. You're storing that in the database. It now becomes reportable, time-stamped, event-driven things you can actually use for audits and other items. The in-use indicator, as you see on here, it's green and it says it's in use. That's because this particular one, I've already gone ahead and it is in use. It's tied to an inspection specification and it's tied to an inspection plan. So this has been used and is active. You can also set them to inactive with that indicator that's right up here. And that inactive indicator is no longer valid to be added to new specifications going forward. But it's still referenced. If it's in an existing specification inspection plan, it'll still be used, it'll still be prompted for. That's very much, oops, sorry, let me go back a little bit. This attribute maintenance, it looks the same whether you're talking about a checkbox, a comment field, or any of the others. So I didn't show multiple examples of that. The only thing that changes when you go through that value as you change the attribute type is a table field name. This says number 001. If you were doing a character field, it would say char 001 through char 200. So I didn't feel the need to go through a whole lot of examples and details there. I think it's pretty self-explanatory for people. The next piece of the puzzle that you're building up into is a specification. And this is linking or combining all the attributes that you want to have prompted for, entered, validated against, and then stored in Epicor's ERP to keep track of those, and also make the determination in the inspection process, are we going to accept or are we going to reject this incoming lot, this incoming batch, this incoming group, whatever you want to refer to it as. So as you add the specifications, there can be multiple revisions of them, and you'll see that in the screen prints that I go through in the next. They each have an effective date. They each have a status. Are they active or are they inactive? As you add the attributes to the specification, you're going to enter details for the validation of them. That's why there's multiple revisions and multiple versions, if you will. They call it a revision, but multiple versions. You might have one that's relevant. You might start with a specification for bar stock, and you might have bar stock of type A and bar stock of type B, where in one case I'm asking for information regarding the powder coating, and in the second case I'm not. You don't need to build multiple versions of it. I can have a specification, group them all underneath bar stock so they're organized and very well controlled and easily defined, but I have one that's a different revision that ties out to different requirements, and you'll see it more as I go to the next screen. So as you're building out the specification, the first thing it's going to do is the primary is the specification ID itself and then a description. Pretty straightforward stuff. And then there's the same thing we talked about earlier, check marks to make it active or inactive, make it inactive. By default, it's active. You set the inactive indicator to do it. Key thing to note, and this is, I keep talking about this as we go through the different screens and going through, once you build one, it really becomes easier to build more and elaborate and expand upon that. As you can see, I mentioned there's a duplicate existing. So once I've created inspection attributes here, you see my specification revision 1, it has deburr, let me move my mouse over there, deburr, diameter, and length. When I went to create the second one, I just used the actions duplicate, and then I either added more attributes or removed attributes that were no longer relevant to the second one as I went through that process. So once you get those baselines down, it does become very easy in the maintenance mode to expand upon them, to make unique one-offs for different situations, etc. You might have a inspection plan that is relevant for production materials, and something we produce and things we want to capture as far as data points. But when that is coming back from an RMA, you want a different set of data points being collected for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward in the presentation. As you're going through the process, you're starting to create a new one. You're going to enter in the revision ID. And I tend to stick to just numerics. It makes my life easier, but it is up to 12 characters long there. The description for that revision and an effective date. And approved. That's the key one that's driving it, just like you have on your revision on a part master. If the revision is not approved, it's not being used. Once it's approved, effective date logic comes into play, whether or not it's being used and offered as a default during the purchase order processing stage. Or, and we'll talk about it more when we go through the PO, if it can be overridden with a different revision or a different version. Once you start getting into more details of the inspection, now what you're doing is you're pulling in those attributes. So again, in our examples, we created some very straightforward examples that'll show up in the more of this presentation. We created one character, one checkbox, one comment, one combo box. We basically just created, excuse me, the one of each, so that I could highlight more in the presentation as we go through it later on, how you would tie them into an inspection plan and the key things that are unique for each one that you need to make sure you do, so it ties back to the attribute you created and stores the data you want and tied to that attribute. So you select the attribute that you want to create, you have the ability to override and create a description for it, and you have the override to set a screen label, which will come up during the product configurator and the configurator designer. As we're building the screen that's presented to the user, that's what will be used there as a default value. And we'll talk more about this minimum value, maximum value, the increments as we move through each example going through. So in the presentation here, I did try to cover each of the examples. So in this first one, we're doing a numeric, and we're adding just that generic attribute I called numeric. If you remember back when we created the attribute, we didn't get asked a lot of information about it. We just said, this is the name of it, it's active, and it's a numeric field. When you're building the specification is when you're building out all of the details, how you want it to be used. So in this case, I pulled in the CSCI numeric as the attribute. I overrode the description to be numeric example, screen label, number. You can put whatever you want. This is what's going to show up during the configurator when the users are being asked for those values. Here I'm saying the minimum value is 10, the maximum value is 50, and increment by 5. What does that mean? It means I can enter 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. That's what's going to end up as the results from this process when I create it. During a checkbox one, not much I can do on that one. There's very limited you can do on a checkbox. You basically have the description, the screen label, and I didn't mention it earlier on these. All of these are tooltips. If you're familiar with Epicor and when you're doing your data entry, when you get into that field, the tooltip is what pops up and says, and so this little enter a number. In this case, I might, if I was working on the deburr one as I did, we added the tooltip says, has the bar stock been deburred? For the diameter, we said enter the outside diameter of the bar stock. So you get those little prompts that are coming up and coming to the users to help them. For a checkbox, there's not really a lot you can do. It's either on or it's off. But of course, if the checkbox was real in this example, it might say, as I used for the deburr, we had the checkbox and with the tooltip says, is the end of the bar deburred? And that's an example, and it's just a yes or a no by setting the checkbox and coming through for it. Excuse me. As you start working on a combo box or a list of values, you're actually allowed to set 2 different parameters for it. So in this first set of parameters, I'm setting what are all the list values. In this case, you have the values 10 through 100. And my description is exactly the same because we're dealing with bar stock. There's not really much difference there, but obviously you could have a value set and a description that's different from it. The key thing that I wanted to focus in on and highlighting during this overview is we have a list of values. That's the first set, but we also have a past list values. So in this example, what I've done is I've presented the user that they can pick any value of 10 through 100, but only the even numbers are going to pass. If the user pulls from that drop down and picks an odd number, it's actually going to trigger a fail for this incoming inspection process for this lot. So that's the one thing to note when you're doing a combo box. You have the capability to present the users 10 through 100, 10 through 200, but only allow certain values to be a pass. So it creates more of that, well, here's everything, which one is it? And they don't have visibility to what the pass is. They only see the list of available options to choose from. On a character attribute, it's a pretty straightforward one. Again, coming into this setup, you're just entering the description, the screen label, and the tooltip. It's just a character. It's just a field that's meant to have something. A good example of one, like I believe I mentioned earlier, might be a serial number. So if you're buying bar stock or you're buying something else that you don't necessarily always get the serial number, but if there is one there, you want to capture it, we can go ahead and have that as an optional field. Not trigger a pass-failure event, but as more and more of your suppliers might be serializing their stock, you can start capturing it. You're starting to see the visibility, and now you can make a decision later on as it starts getting into that higher percentage that people are doing it. Do I now want to make it a required element and start pushing back to my suppliers? A date attribute. During the date process, this might be another one that you want to enter in for, like a date of manufacture or a date of expiration. And here we can set a minimum value. And again, this is a simple example. So the minimum value is set to the date that I created this working example back on September 1st. And the max is through the end of the year. Again, we didn't want to get into advanced ideas and any programming or other types of setups here, but be aware you can make these smart, and you can put a little bit more programming behind it so that it defaults to the minimum value is always the current date. The maximum value, maybe you want to go only to the end of this year or to the end of today, this year plus 1 year, and the initial value can be set so it defaults to the current date. For a straightforward example, this is the easiest way you can set it up there. But and another opportunity that you can look at for these advanced ones I'm talking about, what we typically have done with these, excuse me, is we've asked for an expiration date. That might be true of glues or some other type of adhesives or something else that's coming in through the back door. Excuse me, not through the back door, through the receiving door. And what we want to do is we want to say, I don't want to accept anything that doesn't have a minimum of 6 months remaining of shelf life. So I prompt here in this example, instead of saying date example, I might say expiration date. And then I'll go ahead and allow the user to go ahead and enter the expiration date. I can, through some of the advanced ones like I've talked about, use a programmatic method to say, all right, based on today's date being January 16th and the expiration date that was provided, is there a minimum of 6 months shelf life left on this adhesive or this glue or whatever else is coming in the door? And if it's not, I'll automatically trigger a fail event. This lot would automatically be triggered based on your business rules that says, I don't want anything that doesn't have 6 months or more shelf life to be accepted. The last, I don't think it's the last one. Another one that's in the specifications, you can enter comment fields. Again, very simple setup. It's just a comment block, and it allows the end user to go ahead and enter some comments about the items. I would highly recommend, if you're going to be capturing things that are not relevant data and you don't want to put rules around it, don't use the comment for that. Try to create the field, even though you may not validate against it now, like has the supplier provided you with that serial number or other things like that. Putting them in the comment, it becomes very prone to user decision how they enter the data, what they do with it, and you can't really validate against it. If you build those fields thinking in the future you might need them or might want to use them, you're setting it up already from the beginning for success. So now that as soon as you start enabling it, I can also start looking at some archive data that maybe I've been capturing serial numbers or expiration dates for the past 6 months and I never really did anything with it. You've got that information for relevant lookup versus if it's buried in a comment, if you've done any type of work as a programmer or just a data analyst, once you put it in the comment field, it's very hard to do any true analysis and work on it. All right. Now that we've built up our specification, we're going to work into building the inspection plan. And just like I talked about before, inspection plan has a unique ID, a description. The starting point here is the inspection plan type. There are 2 or 3 inspection plan types in the system. I don't remember them off the top of my head. I'm going to be honest right there. This calibration or inspection, I actually put in my notes right there. We're going to focus on doing one for the inspection plan. All right. Again, same thing as before when we talked about in the earlier ones for the specifications. Actions duplicate will allow you to take an existing revision in combination. I'll move to that screen so it's more relevant, and duplicate it. So again, you're not starting from scratch. Once you've built those first few, you're not always building from scratch. You can start with something that's close to, or maybe has more than what you want now, and adjust it to fill your needs for the new revision. All right, in this case, once you get to the revision screen, just like on a part master, you've got the revision, a description for that particular revision, an effective date, and then is it approved or not approved? And that works, again, just like it does with all the other places where you're familiar with a revision in Epicor. If it's not approved, it's not being pulled in, it's not being provided as an active thing that the user can work with. Once you put in those basic mechanics of the data, the next piece is to now go ahead and start doing an inspection plan. And there's clicking on the Configure Inspection Plan button is going to get you into that. You're going to do the description. Then you're going to come back to, again, the configuration type. This is an inspection plan configuration right there, if I get my mouse to follow me. In my own setup and things, the note that I entered below is I try to make sure that I only make, by default, it could be open for a few different types. I try to make it relevant only for the one that I really want it to be used in, just so it doesn't accidentally get carried into a different situation. We're not going to talk about it here, but there are other types of product configurators that can be created, which is a no inputs configurator. And that's one where it's actually just set up to do automatic data retrieval based on get parameters and things like that, that you can use in a more automated solution, such as things that you might use in a calibration setup on maintenance equipment. You could actually, if you've got smart sensors on there, or to talk about the Internet of Things now that everyone's looking at, where if I've got that dial and I've got that measurement that's checking the temperature and other things like that, I can use some automated procedures to pull those data elements at a specified time frame. Once you've gone into the configuration design, this is really where you're looking at setting up the screen. How is it presented to the user to enter these values, and what's the look and feel of it? So we're going to the Actions menu, we're going to Configuration Designer, then we start creating a new page, and that's what you're seeing here. And what you're doing is basically dragging elements from over here. So the first thing I did was I grabbed the number field and I dragged it over here. I want to have a number presented to the user. I did the same thing for a checkbox and dragged it here. So it's really just grabbing something like checkbox here, clicking it, holding it, dragging it over to the screen. That sets up the beginning of the layout. And you can move those. You don't have to get them set perfectly exactly where you want them now. If you're familiar with any of the other tool sets and some of the designers that are there, or if you've worked with the product configurator, it's going to feel very comfortable how you can move things, readjust them, change the alignment and everything else going forward. Once you get into it, and this might get a little boring, I apologize, because there's a few examples of this one right here. But what you're doing is now the hard part, or not the hard part, but the more detailed part comes into play. So I've dragged this number field up here, and what Epicor has done is opened up this bottom screen down below, and I apologize, it's small. When you get the presentation yourself, or if we have a moment, I'll jump over to the screen and see if I can call up a working example. The key thing to remember is there are fields in here that you need to identify to it. So the first thing is the label that I've highlighted in yellow here. You want to change that so that it changes what's up here, and that shows the text next to the box or next to the checkbox for the user of what they're going to enter in the screen. What I did try to do, and that's why this gets a little repetitious in this process, is I've actually got each one of them called out, and I'll cover them in a little bit higher, at a high level during this discussion. But as we mentioned earlier, there's 5 or 6 different types of attributes you can create: a numeric, a combo box, a checkbox, a comment, a text field, things like that. I've tried to give you a working example of each one here. So again, you can use this like a beginning training exercise, and I've highlighted in yellow over here what you need to change as far as a value set. I only highlighted the one. There's a lot more there. I tried to bring it down to only the ones you need to change and give you notes on what you need to change, so it will work when you start off if you do this on your own without any outside assistance. So I've got each one of them covered through here. The big things that we have to remember are is the external reference. You want to make sure that is set to true. And then what you want to do is in the inspection attribute ID, you're going to link it to the attribute that you want to capture information in. So in this case, I set to true, and then down below, I know it's very hard to see. I apologize for the way the screen is, but it works better on the PowerPoint when you get it on your own machine, I promise. Or if you have any questions, ask us. What I did here was I put in that CSCI_numeric. That, if you remember all the way back earlier when I talked about the attributes, that's the attribute I created for a numeric value. That is the one that's going into the number 0001. If you go back on my presentation and look at that first field. Those are all key because now I know what the link is, and we'll make the link in a minute as far as the evaluation set and the specification, the inspection plan. But at this point in time, I now know that when this is used, and because that first field is CSCI numeric, I go back to the attribute. I know it's stored in the database field in number field number 1. Again, if you're doing ad hoc reporting, if you're doing BAQ reporting, this is how you have your chain to understand where your data is to put it out in your own reports. All right. The rest of these are really just, they're the same every time. Use incremental, use the initial value set. You're setting all of these true for a reason, which is you're telling it to go back to the specification and pull the data that I set up there. That's why they're all set to true, to use those value sets there. All right, checkbox, just as we talked about earlier, there's not a lot of things you do as far as a checkbox. It's a much shorter list to go through. Again, I can't specify enough. Always use that label field, which shows up right here. That's what shows on the screen. So if you want it to be intuitive to the user and not just say checkbox 1 or number 1 or number ID, that's where you're setting that set up there. And always make sure you're getting this link here back to the data set. So it's stored in the database in the ERP system, and you know where it is, so you know how to report on it if you want. Because remember, there's about 200 number fields. You're going to want to know as you go on how to tie them back and link through to them. For a combo attribute, again, pretty straightforward. Set the combo ID here, set the link here. This one, it definitely is very important that you say the use item list is set to true. Because remember, if we go back to the example that I had done earlier, I had a list of values and I had a list of passing values. Want to make sure I use that item list data because that's controlling both. The user is presented with all the values of 10 through 100. The system does an automatic check and says only the even numbers are going to be accepted as a pass condition. Okay. Design outside the comment field, you can see the list up there. It just comes up as a comment. This one does have a little bit different way to do, and there's a note here about just a little bit different way, and I highlighted it a little bit more on the screen here to get that comment field to have a better description for it. Just a little bit different process, but I think you can get it pretty much from this PowerPoint and the screen print that's there. And then a date attribute, same things you're going through, so I'm going to stop. You're probably getting very bored with these by now. All right, now comes building it to the next level. Now we want to tie that inspection plan and that screen that we designed, we want to link it to the part master. So now when you're inside the part maintenance, we've drilled down to the revisions, the inspections, and the detail tab. And now I'm saying what inspection plan is going to be tied to this part master during the purchasing incoming inspection process or during the job manufacturing process, and what specification ID is going to be attached to that. And we want to make sure, sorry for that, wasn't expecting that little pop-up, I apologize. We want to make sure we set it so we have the default. We also have some parameters here to set the sample size and the sample percentage. So if you want to have a certain quantity always tested or a percentage of the quantity being received inspected, you can test it here. You'll notice that little 0 is off a little bit. We've put a note into Epicor. I don't think they fixed it yet. This was done on a 10.1.6 system. I haven't seen it fixed yet, but we'll keep an eye on it and let you know if it does. Now you've made your link, though. I have my inspection plan, the specification ID, what's going to be used. Now, when I create a purchase order, I add that part number to the purchase order line. You notice they've been brought through. So the inspection plan has been defaulted in, along with the revision that I picked when I set it up on the part master, and the specification ID and that revision. You notice I'm on a different revision here. I'm on revision 3 of the specification, but I'm still only on inspection plan revision 1. Just as a side note for my own personals, as you go through these, you can see these fields are open. My user is a super user, has full access to everything in the system. I usually do recommend that when you're setting this type of a system and setup up, the buyer shouldn't have access to this. We would actually recommend turning this off. Quality should be doing the setup and approving what revision of the inspection plan and what specification of the inspection plan is being used by the part master. So we would normally recommend taking this away from the buyer's authorizations. If there's a need to have a change, something needs to be done, make them talk to your quality team to figure out how to get it done for that particular setup. Okay. And that is there. So once this happens now, what's going to happen is I skipped right to the inspection processing. So at this point in time, we've already done our purchase order, we released it, did a goods receipt, and it got pushed into the inspection processing tab. You can see up here on the top of the screen, I've gone ahead and identified the PO receipt that I was doing, and it's already assigned the inspection plan and the specification that I'm going to be used for it when I go through this. Pretty much in line with what you're doing right now for the PO receipts and the navigation of inspection processing within Epicor. Now we come into, we go to the more detailed screen for the inspection sample, and we're going to go ahead and put in and say enter results. When you click on the enter results button, that screen that you redesigned, now if you remember back the configurator designer, this is why it's easier to follow when you have your own PowerPoint in front of you and you can page back. But that's the screen that I designed when we were in that process for the inspection plan and the configuration, and this is what I've approved. This is how it's presented to the user. They will enter all the values that they have, that you've asked for in here, and the system is going to go ahead and make a determination based on the value set. Is this lot being a pass or is this lot being a fail? It's no longer just the user driving it. So I hope at this point it kind of wraps and goes all the way around and you see where it's coming to for that process. Once they're done with that, they're going to go ahead and go through it. The results come back and you're going to get the idea of the pass fail. There are a couple of screens that come up with why it failed and what was there. That was in a pop-up message. I didn't capture that one. I'll try to remember before we send it out to run one that fails and get a pop-up to show it and add that to the presentation for anybody. All right. The last thing we wanted to very quickly touch on was in RMA processing. So if you remember going all the way back to the part master, when we were setting that up, I was on the detail and then the inspection tab, and I put that in there as far as the inspection plan and the specification. If you look here, you've got that same type of control unique for the RMA. So now I can put an inspection plan and a specification ID unique just for RMA processing. So if you've got something that you've manufactured and you've built and you send it out the door, well, obviously you're capturing one set of data elements as it's going through internal production, if it's coming back on an RMA, you probably want a different set of values, and that's where you can do the override, so they come through there. And there are some more detailed ones related to supplier and some other things we can answer more specific questions for. We actually didn't have time to also talk about the skip lot processing that's available when you purchase the enhanced quality module and a couple others. So I think I've gone through all my slides. Let me make sure. Yep, I've covered everything that I had planned to cover. Mr. Burns, I'll give it back to you.
Sounds great, guys. Just give me a moment, and what I'll do is I will get my screen showing again. Steve, thank you. Obviously, you can tell you've got a lot of experience here. We did have a couple of questions that came in. The first one, do you need to have programming experience to use this module?
Not to do the examples that I've shown here. So to be able to do those very straightforward examples, or what I would call a beginner level, pick from a list of values, yes, no type of decisions and things, no. If you want to do more, the next level, you can probably build that. If you're familiar with the product configurator, there is an expression builder in some of that will let you do some of the very simple tests that if the customer, or excuse me, the user said A to prompt number 1, then prompt number 2 should be this, and those type of things. Those can be done through an expression builder that's built in. Some of the more complicated ones, that if A, B, and C are equal to blue, then I only want to show green. For the 5th prompt, you need a little bit of programming, not over the top, but you need a little bit of expertise there.
Great, thanks. Another question that had come in, where can the inspection plans be utilized?
Currently, you can attach inspection plans, as you saw when I was doing that, on the part revisions, and you also saw it in there for RMAs inside of there. I didn't touch on the supplier tab, which does some other things, but you can also assign it to the job and the operations for those. You can also assign them to a particular resource, or to an asset, or to an equipment record for calibration data. That talks more about what I mentioned in the second part of that conversation, where if the equipment's running and you want to do temperature readings or different number of impressions and things like that from Internet of Things ideas.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve. Listening to you, you certainly have deep experience. Is there any, in our customers, is there any verticals or any types of customers that utilize enhanced quality assurance more than others?
I'd say the biggest upturn that we've seen as far as requests to implement this type of functionality, where you've got more detailed, are through our medical device OEMs. So we have quite a few customers that they're required now. So if you're an OEM supplier for some of the larger medicals, a Smith & Nephew, a Philips, a Straumann, a Draeger, all of these type of people, as they're pushing more and more of the manufacturing downstream and giving full control to their OEM suppliers, they're also putting on them the oneness to help with auditing data. So we're getting a lot more requests from that thing, and this just presents better. If you can go in and you get that request, so your customer gets a requirement that they have to do a recall or a trace on a certain lot, set serial number trace, you just are presenting data that looks a little bit more organized, a little bit more professional, and just everything's better about it if it's been in the system and you've already got it already all set. You put in a couple of parameters into a BAQ search or into one of the standard reports. They ask you for everything you produced December 1st through December 31st with this lot number in it. You've got that information, you can produce it pretty quickly. Or what were the tolerance factors for all the barcode stock that you used in that period of time. Right. And we're just seeing a lot of that being pushed as they try to cut their costs. They're requiring more and more of the OEM suppliers to manage that data and be the responsible party for those types of audits.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve. Certainly appreciate your time today. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed Steve's presentation. I also want to just point out my contact information is up on the screen. If we can be of any assistance in any way, answer any questions that you have regarding ERP or Epicor, how to best utilize Epicor, please feel free to contact me. This webinar will be available from our website to download. And also, I'll send everybody that joined today a link to our new YouTube channel where you can watch all of the recorded webinars that we've done over the past year. Please join us for our next webinar coming up on Wednesday, February 21st, 2018 at noon, where we'll give an overview of the new features and benefits of Epicor's product configurator in Epicor ERP 10.1. You can register on our website at www.crawford-software.com or look for an upcoming email invitation. And while you're on our site, check out our new corporate logo and let us know what you think. Steve, thanks again, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you in February. If you have any questions, please contact me. Have a great day.